Welcome to Fun and Games Side Quests. Every episode is a different host sharing a video game they love and why they love it.
Hey y'all, I'm Marc Duddleson, although I usually go by Try4ce or just Try online. I'm from the YouTube channel My Life in Gaming, and I'm also one of the co-founders of the backlog tracking website backloggery.com. Kirby and the Forgotten Land was my game of the year for 2022. It might just be my favorite game on the Nintendo Switch, and I think it remains my favorite game released this decade thus far. And a big part of the reason why is that I have such a strong emotional response to it. Now, that might seem a bit silly to people who don't play Kirby games, or honestly, it probably seems strange even to almost everyone who has played Kirby games. When people think of games that hitch in the feels, as the kids say, I believe they're usually referring to story moments, like when a character dies or there's some kind of heart-to-heart. Cutscene-driven emotion was certainly what drove me to tears when I was younger, although it didn't happen often. Kirby, or more broadly platformers in general, typically don't have heavy moments like these, and yet, the older I get, the more often I tear up when playing the best platformers because, simply put, their joyous gameplay and colorful presentation make me feel like a kid again. I get goosebumps and shivers down my spine. I feel like I'm going through a time warp, and I connect so strongly to my inner child that tears of joy just come out and I can't help it. Back in the late 90s, I was enamored with the Nintendo 64. I truly felt like I was participating in something special because I was witnessing the future of game design taking shape right before my eyes. Even back then, I knew there wouldn't be another time like this because developers were still figuring out 3D concepts and doing things their own way. So every game was fairly unique. And as a huge Kirby fan, I figured that an amazing 3D Kirby game was sure to happen on the console at some point. But unfortunately, it was not to be. And while it was nice at the end of the generation to see Kirby 64 keeping the spirit of 2D platforming alive at a time when 2D gameplay was becoming rare, it felt quite stiff to play and wasn't what I had truly hoped for. And while Kirby has had three-dimensional movement at times since then, most notably in Kirby Air Ride on the GameCube and Kirby Battle Royale on the 3DS, the 3D era of gaming continued on without Kirby ever receiving a true 3D platformer. Now, don't get me wrong. Kirby's Return to Dreamland on Wii, Triple Deluxe, and Planet Robobot on 3DS, those are among my favorite 2D platformers, because they finally brought back the controls of the incredible Kirby Superstar. Kirby was having a renaissance, and I loved it. But there was still that long unfulfilled desire for a 3D Kirby game. So when Kirby and the Forgotten Land came along in 2022, it was the realization of something I had wished for so long ago. Maybe I shouldn't say I felt like a kid again, because truthfully the N64 era coincided with my teenage years, although I was never ashamed to be a fan of the pink puffball even back then. But I also feel this way now about other games and series that I first came to love in my teens, like Zelda and Final Fantasy. I absolutely get sniffly and teary-eyed when the credits roll in games like the Final Fantasy VII Remake series and Final Fantasy XIV expansions. Anything that represents an impressive evolution of something I loved when I was young, whether that's as a kid or a teen, it just gets me. As if I'm channeling these images and sounds to my younger self and his mind breaks in disbelief. The first time I remember feeling this way was when Super Mario Galaxy released in 2007. I was 23 at the time. And it was just such a perfect blend of everything I wanted Mario to become aesthetically, combined with gameplay that I never could have imagined. It was a childhood dream come true, and I've come to consider that to be the best thing that a game can possibly do for me. And Kirby and the Forgotten Land achieved that perhaps the most successfully of anything I've ever experienced. Is it the most amazing 3D platformer I've ever played? Probably not, although I certainly do think it's excellent. The sheer variety of what you can do with every ability and the fluidity of those moves is probably still stronger in the 2D Kirby games. But I think what developer HAL achieved with the controls in Forgotten Land is impressive for the first time Kirby has ever really had such free reign in three-dimensional space. While you can't just fly forever like in the 2D games, there are nonetheless much fewer limitations imposed upon Kirby than I might have expected. My favorite new power for Kirby is the drill, which lets you burrow underground and pop out from under enemies. Watching the Waddle Dee town grow over the course of the game is compelling, and having the blacksmith there to upgrade the various abilities is a real treat that has never really been possible in the series before. The mouthful mode, which is the game's unique signature trick, is also a ton of fun, allowing Kirby to temporarily take the shape of a car, an archway that flies like a glider, a vending machine that shoots out sodas, a donut that can fire blasts of wind, and more. The newer Kirby games also typically utilize these signature abilities in a really compelling way right at the end of the game, and the final blow to the final boss is certainly up there with the most memorably awesome gaming moments for me. Both the Japanese and American titles do tie into the game's plot. The dark twists of Kirby lore are always entertaining. So while I won't spoil what it means in-game, I think it's worth mentioning that rather than Kirby and the Forgotten Land, the Japanese title is Kirby Discovery, which likely set the direction and tone for the developers to follow. Kirby Discovery is a super appropriate title for a landmark foray into 3D that I'd say also echoes the spirit of N64 era experimentation. It also doesn't hurt that longtime series composers Hirokazu Ando and Jun Ishikawa are still at the top of their game, working alongside other collaborators to create incredible new soundtracks for Kirby every single time. They are consistently among my favorite modern game soundtracks. The music from Forgotten Land is no exception, and plays no small part in helping me feel so emotionally connected to the game. Kirby and the Forgotten Land is rarely far from my mind, but I've been thinking about it and how I feel about it even more since Astrobot won Game of the Year at the Game Awards. It's easy to be cynical about the Game Awards just being a big vehicle for advertisement, but I think many of the awards, regardless of speculation over who is even making these decisions or why, do matter, and they certainly mean a lot to the developers who receive them. As Astrobot director Nicolas Doucet celebrated with his team and walked on stage, his face had the same emotion in it that I had when I played Kirby and the Forgotten Land, and indeed Astrobot as well. "Wow, nothing can prepare you for that," he said when he got up to the mic. This is a man who clearly cares deeply for platformers and the impact that they can have. Not only did he share his story of receiving an NES for Christmas in 1989, hey, me too, with Super Mario Bros. And how it was really, really great, but he also commented that his team had a huge privilege to be potentially the first game in the hands of children, and we know what it means very much. Much earlier in the show, when Astrobot won the award for Best Family Game, Nicolas Doucet also said, "Making a family game is important because we're forming the first gaming memories of people. We all have first gaming memories, so it's both a privilege and a big responsibility." I think he has a point, and I suspect he may also be critiquing the industry, including his own employer Sony, for neglecting to make more of these kinds of games for young people. Super Mario Galaxy, Super Mario Odyssey, and Kirby and the Forgotten Land are all excellent games, but would I have felt nearly so strongly about them if I hadn't grown up with games like them? These aren't the games that young people are playing today for the most part, so will there be games in 20 to 30 years that give them the same feeling that these platformers give me? Well, perhaps I shouldn't assume not, and shouldn't be so certain that my own gaming memories are so much better. But I do think platformers are critically overlooked as a positive source of emotional attachment to gaming. Could the industry's neglect of platformers have fostered a generation that's just not as invested in gaming? I wonder. So, Astrobot winning Game of the Year made me just as emotional and happy as playing these 3D platformers because it gave me hope that maybe the genre could make a comeback. We don't see that many of them coming from big companies other than Nintendo, after all. And it makes me happy knowing that a person like Nicolas Doucet, who now has the awards to back up his vision, is there to champion this important and neglected genre at one of the biggest companies in the industry. Well, I apologize that only a small portion of my little talk here about how much I love Kirby and the Forgotten Land was actually about Kirby and the Forgotten Land. But there's just so much that goes into how we feel about a game. A lot of that has to do with our past and what hopes and dreams we had for the future when we were young. And that's why I think platformers, in spite of their low emphasis on story, can carry some of the strongest and most positive emotional weight of any genre. Happy gaming.
Hey, you there! This is Nomad speaking. If you love retro video games and you're itching for some nostalgia, check out the Retro Wildlands podcast. In each episode, I'll use game music and sound to pull you into the gaming experience while I share my own thoughts and maybe a few memories. It's a great way to relive one of your favorite games or learn about a new one. Check out the Retro Wildlands podcast at superpodnetwork.com or wherever you listen to your podcast.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.